Attention all squads, the suspect from Elman, Houston is reported to be an unknown white male about 30, slender build, 5 feet 10 inches tall, 165 pounds, armed with what is thought to be a .30-30 rifle. No further description at this time.
Hello, police operator.
Go ahead, it says news news.
Hello, we've had a shooting out here.
Where is it at? What location?
Between Marsalis and Buckley. It's a police officer. Somebody shot him. It's in a police car. Number 10.
Once we understand that there's all kinds of things going on here, we go look at the arrest, and we find that Oswald and the Tippit murder are somehow intertwined. That doesn't mean that Oswald did it, but it's interesting because after he arrived back at his rooming house, the landlady said that moments before Oswald showed up, a police car pulled up out front, and she said she knew some of the boys. She said, but she looked and she didn't recognize the car, and she couldn't really remember the number, but she thought it had a 1 and maybe a 0. Well, Tippit was in car 10 that day.
The suspect turned out to be Lee Harvey Oswald. He had taken a bus and a cab to his rooming house, picked up a jacket and pistol, then headed out again. He was walking down the street, and police officer J.D. Tippit called him over to his police car, and he just shot him at point-blank range.
If he continued on the path he'd initiated and then taken a right to the Texas Theater, instead, according to the official account, he made a detour, which makes no sense at all, going way out of his way, had an encounter with a police officer by the name of J.D. Tippit. According to the government, he shot Tippit to death. Tippit was actually shot 3 times in the chest and once in the head. And then he fled and, left his jacket in the vicinity of some automobiles in a used car lot. But the fact of the matter is that the 4 shell casings that were found by the first officer had been ejected by automatics. They were of 2 different manufacturers, 2 of Western and 2 Remington Rand. The first officer initialed them. Oswald, as I mentioned before, had a revolver. And it would have been quite absurd for him to shoot a police officer, then open the cartridge casing and remove these incriminating shells, which were not even of the right type. It would eventually turn out that a substitution was made in the evidence, and the original automatic shell casings were replaced with revolver casings. The initials that had been placed on them originally disappeared, and now there were 3 of one manufacturer and 1 of the other.
Mrs. Clemens, where were you on November 22nd, 1963?
I was working for Miss Smotherman, 327 East 10th, just down the block from where Tippit was killed.
Did you know Officer Tippit?
Yes, I saw him pretty many times.
And did you hear the shots?
Yes, I heard the shots.
And what did you do?
I ran out into the street and looked down the street, and I ran back down the street where he was lying, and I looked at him.
Now, when you heard the shots and you went out of the house, did you see a man with a gun?
Yes, I did.
What was he doing?
Oh, he was reloading it. When I said he was reloading his gun.
And how would you describe that man?
Well, he's kind of chunky. He's kind of heavy. He wasn't a very big man.
Was he tall or short?
Yeah, he's kind of short guy.
Short and heavy?
Yes.
And was there any other man there?
Yes, there was one on the other side of the street. All I know, he told him to go.
Mrs. Clemens, the man who had the gun, did he make any motion at all to the other man across the street?
No more told him to go.
Well, he waved his hand and said, go on.
Go.
And then what happened with the man with the gun?
He unloaded and reloaded.
And what did the other man do?
Man kept going straight down the street.
And then did they go in opposite directions?
Yes, they were. They weren't together. They went this way from each other. The one done the shooting went this way. The other one went straight down past street that way.
What was the
the man who did not do the shooting, but the man who went in the other direction from the man with the gun. What was he wearing, if you remember?
Well, first I remember he looked like light khakis and a white shirt.
And was he tall or short?
He was tall.
And was he heavy or thin?
He was thin.
But the one who did the one who had the gun, seconds after Tippit was shot, he was short.
Yes,
he
was short and kind of heavy.
Now, did you testify before the Warren Commission about this case?
I haven't said anything to anyone.
Did anyone come to see you after the murder of Officer Tippit?
Yes, he was a man came, I don't know what he was. He came to my house and talked to me. But I don't know what he looked like a policeman to me.
He did. Did he have a gun?
Yes, he wore a gun.
Mrs. Clemens, how long after Tippit was shot did this man with a gun come to visit you?
About 2 days. It was about 2 days. Said that I might get hurt. Someone might hurt me if I would talk.
About what you saw?
What I saw. He just told me to be the best if I didn't say anything because I might get hurt.
At 10th and Patton, Mrs. Markham saw Oswald approach.
Well, this man was walking along the sidewalk on 10th Street. This police car was driving very slow down 10th Street.
And what happened?
Well, the man kept walking, just like I say, with his hands down in his head. I didn't pay him no mind, I didn't care. And this police car kept coming on, and finally he stopped, and the man stopped. And whether the policeman say, come over to the car, talk to him, I don't know, but he went.
Was he on the driver's side or on the other side?
On the other side.
And did he stick his head in the window?
Yes, sir. He folded his hands like this. He put them in through the window, up on the window, and he leaned over like this.
What do you remember about this man? Was he a big man or a small man? Or what?
No, he wasn't a very big man. He was short, kind of short, so as I remember.
Well, now, was he still standing there when Officer Tippit got out of the police car?
Well, he got out of the window, put his hands back down to his side, and stepped back 2 steps. The policeman calmly opened the door. He calmly crawled out. And for me, I didn't pay no attention because I was, talk, friendly. And the policeman got to even the front wheel on the driver's side, and this man shot him in the wink of your eyes. Just bang, bang, bang.
And what did this man who had shot the officer, what did he do as soon as he had shot him? Did he move back, or did he run, or what?
No, he didn't break out and run fast. He walked fast down the sidewalk, back towards me, and then he seen me. And then he done like this. And of course I did too, and then I slapped my hands upon my face. But I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. What would I do?
Did he say anything at all to you?
He did not. So I can tell you, I closed my eyes and my hands right there, and then I stayed there a few minutes. And I was going to look and see if he's gone or coming after me or what. And I opened my fingers, and I looked, and he was trotting off down across this lot up here. Then he wasn't even out of sight. He saw me go to the policeman. Now, he could have killed me, too. I knew I had to get help for this man. And I knew this police car, all police cars got radios in them. And I'll do what I can to get help for this man. And I tried.
The only witness to the murder of Patrolman Tippit, who is able to identify Lee Harvey Oswald as the person who fired the shots, The only one who actually saw the shots fired and could say, I saw Lee Harvey Oswald fire the shots, is a woman by the name of Helen Louise Markham. Mrs. Markham passed out on the scene shortly thereafter. After the shots were fired, she was taken to the Parkland Memorial Hospital in a state of hysterics and treated there. Thereafter, she was taken to the Dallas police station to view the lineup. We're told that Oswald was number 2 in the lineup. If you read the commission report, it seems that Oswald was the second man in the lineup, not all day long, but quite regularly. He was the second man in a 4-man lineup. And Mrs. Markham picked him out. She said, he's number 2. He's number 2, we're told. And now Mrs. Markham is going to be questioned. Again, we find Mr. Ball doing the questioning. Volume 3, page 310. This is the witness now to the murder of Officer Tippit. Now, when you went to the room, you looked these people over. These 4 men? Yes, sir. Did you recognize anyone in the lineup? No, sir. You did not? Did you see anybody? I've asked you that question before. Did you recognize anybody from their face? From their face? No. Did you identify anybody in these 4 people? I didn't know nobody. I know you didn't know anybody, but did anybody in that lineup look like anybody you had seen before? No. I had never seen none of them. None of these men. Not one of the 4? Not one of them? Not one of all 4? No, sir. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the magic question. Was there a number 2 man there? Mrs. Markham, number 2 is the one I picked. And shortly thereafter, the Ball asked Mrs. Markham if she recognized him from his appearance, and she said, I looked at him. When I saw this man, I wasn't sure. But I had cold chills run all over me. A rather mystic identification, I would suggest. What's the Warren Commission's conclusion? The Warren Commission concludes that Mrs. Markham, in terms of the probative value of her testimony identifying Lee Harvey Oswald, is, quote, a reliable witness. I called Mrs. Markham. I called her because I read in the newspapers which Mr. Ball disparages on television. He said, I went before the commission and brought him a lot of old newspapers, that's all. He said it's the Beverly Hills Bar Association. Yeah, the newspapers are a little bit more accurate about this case in many respects than the commission, because they were talking to the people before the story was in. And Mrs. Markham said to the Dallas police in the presence of Hugh Ainsworth, the Dallas Morning News reporter, and carried in a number of newspapers, the man she saw kill Tippit was short, he was stocky, he had bushy hair. Oh, the commission tries to give the impression that I made up that description somehow. But Mrs. Markham, of course, is not the only person who said that. We have an officer by the name of Sergeant Hill who testified before the commission. He was questioned by Mr. Bellin. He said he had heard on the Dallas radio that the person who shot Officer Tippit had brown, bushy hair, was 5'10", and about 160, 170 pounds. And then Sergeant Hill of the Dallas Police reported, Volume 7, he said further, when I reached the scene, an eyewitness walked up to me and gave me a description of the man, about 5'8", about 170 pounds, and he had brown, bushy hair. The commission likes to believe that I invented the idea of the bushy hair. This is long before I ever dreamed that I would have anything whatsoever to do with this matter. And so I called Mrs. Markham. I called her, and I talked with her. And I said, I'd like to talk with you. She said, oh, I can't talk with you. I've been ordered. I've been ordered by the FBI and by the Secret Service and by the Dallas Police. I'm not allowed to talk with anyone. Well, we discussed the matter at great length. I told her that probably even down there in Dallas she heard the expression, this is a free country. That means that the police cannot tell anyone not to talk. Anyone who wants to speak can speak. And finally, she did speak with me. And I asked her. Mr. Ball made much of the fact that I asked her leading questions. Of course I asked her leading questions. That is the function of defense counsel. You're supposed to ask leading questions. It is not the function of counsel questioning his own witness, however. Like, was there a number 2 man in there? And I did ask her leading questions. I said, was he short? And she said, he was short. He was short. I said, was he stocky? Was he a little on the heavy side? Not too heavy, but a little on the heavy side. Was his hair bushy? Just a little bit bushy, she said. A little bit bushy. So she confirmed, in essence, a portion, certainly, of her original statement to the press. You know Oswald's description? Medium height or a little taller, almost painfully thin, with thin light-colored hair which was receding. Not exactly the same description Mrs. Markham gave to the police, to the reporters, or even to me many weeks thereafter. Well, I went before the commission and told them what she had told me. And, of course, the commission called Mrs. Markham back, and she denied page after page after page that she had ever talked with me. She was questioned by Alan Dulles, a member of the distinguished panel, Warren Commission. She was questioned by Gerald Ford, congressman of Michigan, who has written an account in Life magazine, totally at a variance from the Warren Commission report. He's a distinguished member of the panel of the Warren Commission, and questioned and questioned and questioned, and she said she never talked with me, never talked to anyone over the phone, never gave that description, etc. The commission called me back, and the Chief Justice, a very moderate man for whom I have the greatest of respect, came to the conclusion, which he released publicly, that I have every reason to doubt the truthfulness of your statement, Mr. Lane. When was the last time a Chief Justice of the United States accused an attorney who testified before him of committing perjury? I asked the Chief Justice and the Commission to take my testimony and Mrs. Markham's testimony and submit it to the United States Attorney's Office for prosecution for perjury, and let a jury of my fellow citizens determine who was telling the truth. Of course, the Commission declined to do that. I was rather confident about that, because I have a tape recording of that conversation with Mrs. Markham. Do you think the Commission ever I told the Commission I had the recording. Do you think the Commission ever directed me to give them the recording? It's a very serious question, since I did not have permission from Mrs. Markham to make the recording. Mr. Rankin asked me that. He said, did you have permission from Mrs. Markham to make the recording? Sounds like someone really dying to get his hands on the recording, doesn't it? I said, no, I did not have permission. If the Commission directed me to give them the recording, then, if they had directed me, and I wrote to Mr. Rankin, counsel for the Commission, I wrote to the Chief Justice, and I said, will you direct me to give you the recording? Then, if I was so directed, the crime is to make it without permission and to release it, to divulge it without permission. If there's a crime at all, and there's a close question as to whether or not it is a crime. But to make it is not a crime, to divulge it is not a crime, the combination. The Commission ordered me to give it to him, directed me, and I gave it to him. There would have been no crime. The Commission, of course, never directed me to give them the recording. Chief Justice merely said he didn't believe I had it. I went back to my office and I pondered this problem. I don't want to be prosecuted. I don't want to go to jail. But I thought that there were issues here which transcend the personal consideration of any single human being. And I voluntarily mailed that tape recording to the Chief Justice and to counsel for the Commission with a letter saying to the Chief Justice, solely this, not asking for an apology, of course not, saying, Mr. Chief Justice, you now have the recording. I ask that you merely send me a letter saying that you no longer have any reason to doubt the truthfulness of my testimony. That was on July 7th. I have not yet received an answer from the Chief Justice. Well, they called Mrs. Markham back before the Commission, this reliable witness, and they asked her the questions, 15 questions, I believe, all over again. Did you ever talk to him, etc., etc.? No, never did. Then they said, Mr. Liebler, who was questioning Mrs. Markham, page 500, volume 7, Mr. Liebler, and said, I have to tell you the truth. Frankly, he said, we have a tape recording that purports to be a conversation between yourself and Mr. Lane. Unfortunately, he was unable to play the recording for her at that time in the morning because he did not have a tape recorder. I think I am really responsible for that. I just sent them the tape. I did not send them a tape recorder. But the full force of government went into action, and by that afternoon they secured a tape recorder. And they played the recording for Mrs. Markham. And she heard it, and here they started to play it, and then she interrupted at one point. Page 501. The first time she interrupted, Mr. Lieber said, "Let's stop the recorder. What do you mean to indicate by that?" Quote, "This man I have never talked with. This lady was never on the telephone." Ponder that one for a moment. This lady was never on the telephone. If that's her voice, she was on the telephone. If it's not her voice, how does she know? Well, in any event. This man that called me like I told you, he told me he was from the City Hall, the police department of the City Hall. Well, now, do you remember having this conversation with somebody? Yes, I do, but he told me he was from the police department of City Hall. The tape starts, "Mrs. Markham, my name is Mr. Lane." And he had to get some information, a little more information from me, etc., etc., etc. And then Mr. Liebler said, "Do you remember specifically when the phone conversation took place, etc.? Now, did he tell you it was from the police department?" "Yes, sir." And Mr. Liebler says, "Now, on this tape recording right here, this man is asking you what the police did." She said, "I know it." Mr. Liebler said, "He said the police took you and your affidavit?" And her answer was, "That man, I have never talked to that man. I talked to a man that was supposed to have been from the police department of City Hall. Do you recognize this as the voice of the man you talked to?" "No, it is not." "This is not the same voice?" "No." "How do you explain the fact that the woman's voice on this tape recording is your voice?" "I never heard that." "You never heard the man's voice before?" "And I never heard this lady's voice before. This is the first time." "Do you have any doubt in your mind at all that the lady's voice on the tape recording now is your voice?" "It is my voice, but this man told me he was from the city police." And on and on and on, and finally, he told me he was from the police department, and this lady never talked to me. Which lady is that? On the tape. Which lady on the tape? It was a woman talking. The lady's voice that was talking on tape here? Yes. I thought that was your voice. Not at the first there. The commission concludes, in terms of the identification of Lee Harvey Oswald, Mrs. Markham is a reliable witness. Well, Mark Twain once said, "Whoso, clinging from a rope by his hands, severeth it above his hands, must fall, it being no defense to claim that the rest of the rope is sound."